Well, welcome to this week's podcast. Me and my twinny, Peter. How are you, Peter? How was your weekend? How's your week been?
It's all right, thanks. Yeah, not too bad. I've got 6 weeks to go at the
Oh,
NSPCC as we record this. 30 days, 29 after today. It's a big week in politics and government, isn't it? With a budget which everyone seems to have been waiting for ages. So I don't know. Should we start there and have a few reflections on the new government? There seems to be a huge kind of love-in with the sector, doesn't there? There was a reception in Downing Street, which people seem to have got extremely giddy about, and there's been lots of our colleagues with their pictures being taken outside 10 Downing Street. Were you there? Did you get your picture taken?
No, of course not, Peter. DSE never gets invited to these things, which always puzzles me a little bit, because we've got the biggest reach into the sector of any organisation, mainly because we're not a membership body, so we're not restricted by having membership. So we have literally, I mean, I can't remember, I think we have something like 38,000 charities who engage with us just via our newsletter and things like that. So we have a really big reach. But actually, we don't mind about that, because the problem is we actually don't want to get too close to the government as an organisation, because that makes it very hard to criticise. I don't know if you've read My Trade by Andrew Marr, which is, he wrote this book about the history of journalism. It's a brilliant book, and I absolutely loved it, and so fascinating. One of the points he makes in it is about political journalists have this desire to get really close to the seats of power, so to get close to ministers and senior civil servants so that they get the scoops and the stories and stuff. But he says the problem is you then start to sympathise, and that you then start to understand, and then you then stop your critical thinking, you stop your sort of forensic examination of their policies and things, because you feel very sorry for them. And I've always felt that that's a real danger for us in the sector. Like, we have this thing, like, we want to get close to government, but the trouble is, the closer we get, the more likely we are to end up with people saying things like, oh, but they're trying their best, and they've got other things to worry about. And my line is always, that's their problem, not ours. We need to keep focused on what we need to do. So I do worry that they're saying lots of the right stuff, which is fine. I don't mind them saying the right things. Whether they deliver on those things or not, I don't know, and I have some suspicions. So I don't think we should be cynical about it, but on the other hand, I think we should be deeply skeptical, because warm words don't heat homes, Peter.
I would think that probably me and the NSPCC would be the usual suspects that you'd expect to be at that love-in. To be honest, I mean, I wasn't there. I was doing something very interesting somewhere else, and I'm not sure if I missed the invitation or I wasn't invited. And I felt similarly that I didn't mind not being there, because actually there are some other organisations that deserve the access a bit more than I do and we do. And I was quite impressed with some of the individuals and organisations who do seem to have been present at the conversation. So fair play to someone who'd worked on the guest list. Slightly mixed feelings, I say, about potentially missing me off, or say maybe it was lost in the post, or I ignored it because I had this other invitation which I had accepted, which it clashed with. But there's all sorts of positive feelings coming out about it, which then that does make me feel a bit more skeptical. So we're going to have a covenant between the sector and the government. I'm not sure what that means.
Well, I'll come back to that, but I just want to come back to the guest list for the moment, because the sector had no say whatsoever in the guest list. We didn't even know who was going. It was all driven by somebody within government. So, and that caused, without naming any names, quite a lot of crossness amongst people.
Oh, really?
Not least, what they're already positioning themselves as being the experts in our sector, which to be perfectly honest, pisses me off a bit. And I worry about that. On the one hand, it's great that there's so many of them have got sector experience, but on the other hand, so many of them haven't actually been in the sector for quite some time, and things have changed. So I'm, healthy skepticism. And the covenant, I mean, some of the sector's deeply cynical about it, Peter. I don't know how you feel about the new covenant, mainly because, the compact ended up with quite a bad press at the end, although it's in some areas, there are still some local authorities, who are kind of working to the broad principle of it. So I don't know what you think about the covenant, Peter.
Well, to be honest, I don't really know what it is. And it sounds a bit kind of theoretical and general and not as important as having direct impact on the issues that matter. But, in principle, the idea of there being mutual understanding and appreciation between the government and our sector can only be a good thing. My cynicism, though, starts with a worry that in the same week there was an investment summit which all sorts of other people were invited to. And if the idea is that you put civil society in this box over here and have a conversation with us about our things, and then you talk about economic growth with a set of other people, then that's a bit of a problem. Because if I have a bee in my bonnet about our sector, it's that we don't half like talking to one another about ourselves. And if this is just the government joining us to talk about ourselves, as opposed to the government working to get the very best from our sector on the issues which matter to this country, then that's going to be a problem. So we've got the budget this week. It seems every likelihood that employer national insurance contributions are going to be increased. That will have a major impact on the budgets of any charity that employs people. And I've seen talk in the press about how the Treasury is going to recompense public sector organisations for the cost of these employer national insurance contributions because it will impact on the work they're doing. Well, is anyone thinking about the impact that this cost will have on the work that charities are doing? What does a covenant say about that sort of an issue? I don't want to sound like special pleading, but if there is a special understanding and relationship between our sector and the government, you would think that someone would be asking the questions or making the observation that this will have a material impact on the level of activity for any sum of money our sector will be able to deliver if we're employing staff.
I know we're not supposed to agree with each other, Peter, but I also agree. And also I get very, very cross about it. Both the two things you've raised. Firstly, that we ought to be at those economic conversations, those business conversations, though it just doesn't make any sense to leave us out because, like we underpin the economics, the fiscal society. People talk about us as being a really nice to have or the lovely vulture sector, but actually the whole bloody shebang collapses if we're not there shipping people off to appointments and rescuing people from various situations that they're in. So that really annoys me. And the NI thing also irritates me beyond belief because, there's quite a large wedge of funding that comes from the government to charities. I can absolutely bloody guarantee you that they're not going to go back and say to those local authorities or those central department bodies who are funding bits of the sector, you need to increase the amount you give them by 1% or 2% or whatever it is in order to cover off the increase in national insurance. So what we're going to end up doing as charities is having to deliver the same work again with less money to do it because where the hell are we going to find an extra 1%, which sounds nothing, but it's huge. If you're a big organisation, 1% extra on your national insurance bill for your staff is a lot, but if you're a small organisation, proportionally, it's really hard to find. So I do worry about that, and I don't understand why. I haven't seen any of our sector, although me too, I blame myself as well, Peter, because actually it's something that I should have been banging on about that I haven't. And of course, it's far too late now because, the budget's the day after tomorrow. So, it feels too late, as I've said, because the budget's on Wednesday, but actually it won't be, most of it isn't going to be implemented until April next year, is it? So there still is time to go back and say, actually, you need to rethink some of this. I don't think in principle, but you've got to think about the consequences. Businesses can find that money out of profit. We can't. We don't make profits. We barely cover the costs of delivering our services.
And we can't put our prices up without impacting on something or other. Yeah. I suppose in due course, a covenant, if it works in the way that the old compact sought to do, would encourage and expect full cost recovery for contracts. So that might help in terms of the money being passed to local authorities in public spending and then them being obliged or required to price that into contracts which the third sector deliver to them. But then that gets me banging the table about another thing, which is far too many civil servants just think about our sector as organisations to be deployed to deliver, either free or under contract, what it is they've decided they want or need to achieve their objectives, as opposed to starting with what are the realities of people's lives and what are our organisations doing, starting from the reality of those lives. And so that way of thinking doesn't, I think, get the best of our sector as well. So I would love it, and this does happen in some places, for us to be played into the big and the small conversations about how do we achieve impact, positive social and economic impact for people on the challenges facing this country. And when you have a really good kind of dialogue about those things together with one another, and you design the policies, the programs, the guest lists for receptions together, you're probably going to come up with better outcomes. But,
it's integrating it. I mean, it makes me think of, the Wes Streeting in his NHS consultation. There's been a great deal of cynicism in the press about it, and lots of, what I think are frankly stupid remarks about, you've had 14 years to think of what the solutions are to the NHS. Why can't you just crack on and do it? And of course, as leaders, Peter, you and I both know that is never, ever how you affect change ever. If you come in swooping in from the top and saying, this is how it's got to be done, and I've decided, and I've had a group of clever people go away and work it out, you can't deliver it. And we've seen that time and time again with NHS reform. So I think a consultation is a bloody good starting point. Ask those people. And I feel that also about, because again, we talk about the sector and government, but in reality, we don't really deal with central government. Most of the sector deals with at local level anyway, at local authority level, or local health service levels and so on, but also at other departmental levels. So criminal justice charities are not working via DCMS, and nothing to do with them. They want to work with Justice Department. And so if the Justice Department isn't engaging the voluntary sector or criminal justice charities in thinking about what they do about prisons and sentencing and support and parole and probation, all the rest of it, they're missing a massive trick. And I, again, don't really see any signs of that. I would say the biggest weakness in DCMS and us sitting in it as a whole sector is that we need DCMS to get us into the other departments. And, we need them to put pressure on other departments to engage us. And, it's early days, maybe this lot are going to do something differently, but we've just never succeeded so far. It's almost like DCMS hangs on to civil society and doesn't allow us to go to the places where we need to be. But we'll see.
I mean,
it is early days.
We have got a DCMS Secretary of State who is formerly of our sector.
She is.
Children's Society alumni, isn't she? And we have a Secretary of State for Health who's distinguished former employee of our sector, haven't we? I mean, I too, we must be careful not to agree with everything. I too was quite encouraged about his I was quite encouraged about his let's have a big conversation about what prevention really means in the health service, and how do we shift out of hospitals and into community. And if you just have NHS people talking to one another about that, it's a bit like our sector talking to ourselves about ourselves. They will come up with solutions which will be marginally different ways of treating illness than exist at the moment, as opposed to, if you want to have a serious conversation about prevention, there are amazing organizations in our sector that can make a huge contribution to those discussions. So I mean, it'd be interesting to see how that exercise is structured and developed, but there is a potential opportunity to co-produce, to use the jargon, some really different ways of addressing the health system in our country.
It's interesting, well, because it's how the narrative frames up. So my mother's just had a major operation, and she's in recovery. She's out of hospital now, recovering quite slowly. But she was talking about the fact that the nursing staff in the hospital she was staying were saying they're under massive pressure to discharge her, because there's demand from above, for beds basically, and she was framing this as there's real pressure from the bosses at the top and from the government, and it's their fault. And I said to her, Mummy, actually that's not technically true. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, the pressure is from us, the public. I said, between you being diagnosed with this major life-threatening condition and getting your operation was 13 weeks. That's 13 weeks that your life was at risk. And so and none of us were happy about that. We all moaned about it, didn't we? And we moan about it when we can't get the GP's appointment. So actually the pressure is coming from the public. And all the government is really doing is responding to that pressure to say, right, we need to fix it. And it comes back, like we talk a lot, don't we, about communication and politics and narratives, and also the same with charities. And I think there's something key about that. I mean, that makes me think, Peter, I don't know if you've read about the Runnymede Trust getting wrapped over the knuckles by the Charity Commission about a tweet that they put out that Robert Jenrick got cross about, to do with this, very tragic and difficult case of Chris Cubber. And so probably wasn't that well worded of a tweet, to be fair. But the Runnymede Trust, the point they're making is about, we have inequalities, racial, disability, like that. There are so many things built into the system, and they have to be able to campaign and speak out about these things without politicians taking it personally and saying, and I found that quite interesting. I found it that we've still got this "don't you dare say" stuff. Having said that, in Robert Jenrick's defence, the tweet that I read, because I read it, was probably not brilliantly worded and did sort of imply that the jury was wrong, etc., which they may have been, who knows, but that's the system that we're in. That always brings me back to, if you don't think the law or the system's right, you need to change it, which is of course what the Runnymede Trust is trying to do. So it's never straightforward, which tends to be our conclusion about everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, I didn't see the tweet. I saw that they had withdrawn it. I mean, based on what I read about it, it looked like something which had been designed to provoke a reaction, and which is what politicians like to do. I'm not sure it's what charities should be doing in such a kind of febrile and contested. Was it contested? Given that a lot of evidence had led a jury to a particular conclusion. In that case, it's probably not the best case on which to base the arguments you're trying to make. On the other hand, you can be absolutely sure if you do insert yourself into that space, you're going to generate a lot of attention. And sometimes, communication is about provoking a reaction imperfectly. But I couldn't and wouldn't defend that tweet if I've understood it correctly.
Yes.
It's not something I think I would have done or we would have done.
No, it's, and as I said, I think it's, they were using that as an example of how, the system might be flawed, but I don't disagree. I don't think the tweet was particularly well worded. But again, it's, when you are campaigning in areas that are really sensitive and contentious, sometimes I guess people feel they need to be contentious and they need to create, I mean, and I'm kind of up for that. I mean, I'm just always horribly aware that change in society never happens by people being nice to each other. It just doesn't happen. You need to needle and vote. You need to sellotape yourself to the M25, or stand on the roof of a train so it can't take off. I mean, I'm sure I'll get loads of criticism for saying that, but there's a reality to it. It's incredibly rare that two people sit in the room having a lovely conversation as a result of that society changes. It normally, especially because the people in power are so attached to the way things are, and so detached from the way things are. If you see what's on a different sort of level, it's it's like we get this languaging a lot. I mean, like the commission fell prey to this over the last few years, and I'm hoping they're moving on from it. But this whole thing about, we've got to be polite to each other, we've got to be nice to each other, being kind, and speak properly and use the right tone. But that's the language that people in power use. That's like, if you speak to me nicely, I'll listen. And it's like, that's not okay, because that's a power dynamic. And sometimes you need to disrupt that power dynamic and say, I'm not going to speak to you nicely because you haven't been listening when I spoke to you nicely. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shout at you, or whatever the thing happens to be. So I'm just very aware. I mean, obviously we have Andrew Perkins as one of our trustees at DSC, who's the great historian of the voluntary sector. And, almost always all the stories he tells about profound change that's been facilitated by the sector has involved people shouting about stuff,
Yeah, shouting about stuff is one thing, though. As gluing yourself to the M25 so that your mother's ambulance can't get her to the hospital is another matter. I mean, where does one draw the line between direct action, which is provoking of people's opinions and direct action which offends or is kind of counterproductive in relation to other people's lives.
Yeah. But it's inconvenient, Peter. I mean, your mother's ambulance to the hospital is one thing. And of course, that was wildly exaggerated by the media at the time, that whole sort of thing. I mean, nothing like that actually happened as far as I recall. It was like, what if, what if, what if?
Yeah.
But actually, it's like if you think about the climate and you think about the environment, no action's been taken. Nobody's been listened to. We're still doing the same stuff that we're doing in this country. And we can talk, or we can fluff it up as much as we like we've got a better, greener thing, or, carbon offsets or all the rest of it. But the reality is, the planet is boiling away. It's going to create more and more strife and difficulty in those countries where they already don't access to have the right levels of resources and wealth in order to help them overcome it. So we're going to end up with even more people migrating to the north and sort of colder south. So I think, I think sometimes you need people, because it's not happening, Peter. The lovely, people flying all about. How many? What COP are we on now? 27 or 8 or something ridiculous. So we've had 27, 28 of these bloody things. What's really changed? Still going up. Temperature's not coming down.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, but
passionate.
yeah,
People,
but
I think people are angry about it, Peter, and they should be. Not being nice about it. So whenever I see these, young campaigners, because they're often young, on the telly talking about it, I'm like, I get you. I probably wouldn't take that action, but somebody probably has to. The suffragettes had to chain themselves to the railing, Peter. Anyway, maybe we'll disagree on that.
Well, yeah, I don't see how throwing a load of orange paint over a work of art advances the cause. If anything, it plays into the hands of those people who want to find a reason not to take action. That's my worry. And I'm all for young people's enthusiasm and radicalism and all the rest of it. And I was there once, but I'm not a great.
The people who take action are the people who wouldn't take action anyway, Peter. Like, if you're committed to making change happen, however much people get their attention doesn't make any difference, and it gets in the headlines. It always makes me laugh when there's some scandalous story about a charity chief exec's pay or something that's happened in a charity, and you get all these people saying, right, that's it, I'm cancelling my direct debit and I'm never giving them money again. And you think to yourself, you never gave a bloody penny.
You again.
At all. And I think it's the same principle. I would have changed my mind, only I'm really offended by the fact they chucked a bit of orange paint over a tennis player. I'm like, bollocks, sorry, forget, well, whoever, this will go out, whatever, we're being real, aren't we? I'm like, that's absolutely nonsense. There's not a cat in hell's chance that you're going to be doing that anyway, because you wouldn't care. In fact, you'd probably be there, making change happen. So no, I think I absolutely get the frustration. And it's all right for us, Peter, because we're now in the category of older people. And the planet will probably be all right by the time we've, wend our way into whatever comes afterwards. It's the younger people who are going to have to clean up all the shit. There you go. What else has been on your mind? Oh, I tell you what we did have, which was very nice. David Holdsworth, the new Chief Executive of the Charity Commission. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he came to speak to our civil society group. Our group of about 80 or so infrastructure bodies. We sort of formed in the pandemic, and we've kept going since to sort of cooperate and share intel and, try and influence where influence is required. And he came.
80 infrastructure bodies, that's almost as many as there are children's charities.
Yeah, but if you think about all the subsectors, Peter, and a lot of infrastructure bodies are representing really small charities who don't have a voice.
Yeah.
They don't have time, they don't have the policy people, they can't keep up with stuff. So a lot of what infra bodies do is they do that work for small charities who don't have a policy officer or who don't have access to training, who can't find the funding to learn about how to be a better governor. So that they they pretty much do a good job, I would say. But anyway, he went down a storm. It was very, very refreshing. He was so open, so honest, so accessible, and my colleagues came away feeling a real sense of, this is a commission we can have sensible conversations with. Although, having said that, I notice again, I don't know if you've come across this story, Peter, but this is about the commission's investigation into mermaids,
Yes.
The charity.
Yeah.
And anyway, they found no wrongdoing at all, no evidence of, governance wrongdoing or anything like that. But they did say that, from memory, that they needed to follow the recommendations of the CAS report, and they needed to make that clear on their website. And that kind of rang a tiny alarm bell with me a little bit. Not about the content of the CAS report at all, but is it the right of the regulator to say that a particular charity has to follow a particular guidance? Because it's only guidance, even on the NHS, they're only using it as guidance. And so I just wondered if they were perhaps overstepping the mark ever so slightly by saying, you must follow the findings of this report, because I'm not sure that's their role.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about that.
The
report itself, but just
think,
that general.
Yeah, on the general point, I think charities need to be careful not to go beyond the levels of expertise that others have. Now that's not about guidance. That's about, so there are things which people would like the NSPCC to say, which actually I don't think we should, because they are medical matters for doctors to determine. So that and particularly in that kind of gender area, that's somewhere I think one has to be careful. Now I don't know if what the Charity Commission have said there is kind of shorthand for pay attention to medical best practice, because I would agree with them there. I think the CAS report is very good personally, but that may be, I'd have to look at exactly what they said to get to the bottom of that. But I know what you mean. In terms of, if someone thinks, just because I think a report or anyone thinks a report is worth reading, that doesn't mean we have to slavishly comply with it. But what was it about David Holdsworth that are you giving him the benefit of the doubt in a way that we didn't quite give the government the benefit of the doubt on, or did we? I mean, I think we were saying that the government are a breath of fresh air and they've got some knowledge and interest in the sector, and that is a good thing. And it sounds like David Holdsworth has got knowledge and interest in the sector, and that's also a good thing. But are you giving him a better mark out of 10 than Lisa Nandy, or around about the same?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that I think it's kind of an unfair comparison to a certain degree, because whilst there's politics in every regulator, of course, the reality is that regulators are supposed to be outside of politics. So David, in theory, doesn't have the same pressures that Lisa Nandy does. I mean, Lisa Nandy's got to keep her job, keep her seat, navigate, aggressive journalists, persuade the civil service, as do all ministers and all MPs. So I have a lot more. I think that's a much tougher job, actually. And of course, they've got to be super careful in a way. I mean, David has to be quite careful, because obviously as the regulator, he mustn't say anything that can come back to bite him. But on the other hand, he is able to be a little bit more honest and a little bit more open about the challenges the Commission faces in a way that government can't quite in the same way, especially because there isn't particularly a hostile press circling the Commission, waiting to pounce. I mean, obviously we all keep an eye out and have a go, whereas there's because our journalism at the moment is catch you out journalism. It doesn't seem to me to be, let's discuss the issues, let's explain to me why you see it that way. I mean, Laura Koonsberg on a Sunday sometimes drives me mad. Skillful political journalist that she is, with constantly asking the same question over and over again. And they've basically said, I'm not answering that question, and they don't let go. And I'm like, this isn't helpful. Like, let's get to, the meat of stuff. And I think that they're in a particularly difficult place, politicians and ministers, because of the let me catch you out culture of our current journalism, which I don't think is particularly helpful.
You make me think we need to get Lisa Nandy and David Holdsworth on the podcast and have an extended discussion with them in this safe space.
Yeah. Actually, that's not a bad idea. We might want to reach out to a couple of people, Peter, and see if they want to come and have a chat with us. I think they probably have to have a listen first and see whether or not they felt we were safe. Although I've known David for years, so I might have a think about that. We'll have a think about that. And if there's any, and in fact, listeners, if there's anybody you think you'd quite like to have us have a listen to in addition to me and Peter, let us know. If there are voices you'd like to hear from anywhere. It doesn't have to be, the chief executive of the Commission. It can be a service user, or, your mate who's a trustee of the local tiny charity. We don't mind.
We had I guess we'll need to wind this one up in a minute. I went to the New Philanthropy Capital annual conference a couple of weeks ago, which was really interesting. There's some great speakers there, and it's quite a discipline for me to sit there quietly and listen to other people for the best part of a day. It's a good thing to put yourself through. I'll come back to that in a second, actually, because it reminds me of a story when I once took David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, to see the NSPCC's primary school service at a school in his constituency, and it was a 25-minute assembly, and I could see him really. He clearly hadn't sat still that length of time for a very, very, very long time. And immediately the assembly finished, he leapt up and sort of took control and started asking the children if they knew who he was and how old they thought he was and all of this. And it was good, but that wasn't really the purpose or point of being there. Come and meet the Prime Minister and have him tell you what he thinks about this, that and the other. But anyway, why did I come to that? Oh yes, because I was at the New Philanthropy Capital conference and listening to other people, which was very good for me for a considerable period. And now I've forgotten completely what the point of this.
I do that all the time. It's our age, babe. It's our age.
Oh dear.
Well, I'll come back to while you're thinking, while you're trying to remember, I'll come back. I suspect David Cameron was just being very, very clever and thinking future voters. They might only be primary school age, but let me get in there now. Let me start influencing now. I probably would have done the same, to be fair. Did you remember?
I have no idea. Can't remember. Maybe I'll remember next time.
Maybe you'll remember next time.
Maybe
well, it's probably
just
time to wrap up now. Yeah, probably time to wrap up now, isn't it? Anyway, so
okay.
That was good fun. That's me ranting again, which I get very passionate about things. But as I know, Peter, you just express your things rather less forcefully, perhaps, than I do. But I think you're just as opinionated and passionate as I am about many things.
Thank you very much. Let's hope so. We'll look forward to the budget. We'll see if there's anything in the budget for older people. I don't think we are quite pensioners yet, but we're certainly older people. And we'll see everyone again next time.
Yeah. Thanks for listening all.
Take care.